How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here with your 2024 NDC schedule.
We'll be at as many NDC conferences as possible this year, and you should consider attending no matter what. The Copenhagen Developers Festival happens August 26th through the 30th. Tickets at cphdevfest.com.
NDC Porto is happening October 14th through the 18th. Tickets at ndcporto.com.
We'll see you there. We hope. Hey, guess what? It's .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
We're here again.
Yes.
You can't get rid of us.
It's still the summertime, too, so we've been at home for a while.
Yeah. I had a sad weekend. I went to a funeral of my cousin who was 3 years younger than me, and it was too soon for her, but cancer sucks.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, man. It's reality we're living with. We're now older than friends of ours that we're losing.
However, I did get a chance to visit with the other Franklins in the family, and they're a stoic bunch, man. There was nary a tear, even though they felt the loss deeply. It was very strange. Anyway, I won't go into that. How are you?
I'm good. You know, it's summer winding down, getting ready to go to Copenhagen Developers Festival in the near future here. And that'll be the first trip since June. So it's been a good couple of months on the coast. And, it's nice up here.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've been smoking a lot of salmon and ribs and, that kind of thing.
Is that good for your lungs? I'm not.
The smoke?
Smoking salmon.
Yeah, smoking salmon. No. But plus, it's really hard to keep it lit.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump into the way we start the show with Better Know a Framework.
Awesome.
All
right, man. What do you got?
Well, this started out, of course, as a way that I could poke, a little dive into little parts of the framework, the .NET framework, back when it was a Windows framework, and then it just sort of evolved to Carl Says Something.
Something. I don't know. Something.
Somebody once said, this is Carl does a Google search 5 minutes before the show. But today we have something different, and it involves you, Mr. Campbell. So it's about Dev Intersection. So tell me what's going on.
So we've got a side-by-side show, as we like to do at Dev Intersection. We're going side-by-side with a new show, or at least a new name, which is the Next Gen AI show. So this is at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas from the 10th to the 12th of September. So coming up right away.
Right.
And we've got a special offer putting on. We call it the BOGO offer, the buy one, get one free.
That's right. So if you haven't registered yet and you want to go and you want to get a free ticket, what you do is you use the code GENAIBOGO, GENAIBOGO, discount code when you're registering at either Next Gen AI Conf or devintersection.com. And with the full price of registration, you'll receive an email confirmation, which will include a unique discount code for a free second registration to pass on to an additional attendee.
Right.
So there you go. It's buy one, get one free.
And by the way, you can register to either show. It doesn't matter which, and you have access to everything. We tend to do the marketing towards the Microsoft community, Visual Studio, C# on the Dev Intersection side, and the marketing towards the AI community on the Next Gen AI side. But we want we call it intersection for a reason. It's a crossing over of different interest areas. And so that's why we have the two names and the two websites, but it's all the same show.
That's great. So that's what I got. Who's talking to us today, Richard?
Awesome, dude. And speaking of AI stuff, I grabbed a comment out of show 1894, which we did back in April of this year with Carl Gitz.
Yeah.
We were talking about programming with speech and AI. And this particular comment comes from SD Penner, who said, I thought this was great. This opened my eyes to new ways of working with Visual Studio. because that's the problem with Visual Studio. Like everything's in there, you just can't find it, right? Like there's so many tools. Oddly enough, or maybe suspiciously, this recent Code Rush video came across my feed where they talked about supporting voice commands that were mentioned in a podcast on .NET Rocks, because we've already done this, right?
Yeah.
We talked to Mark Miller when he was playing with the idea as well. So you're right. There's an exploration of tooling right now.
Yeah.
I think a general pressure against the user interface to just include sort of that chat mechanism and or voice mechanism with it in a way to describe your goals, describe your ideas, and use large language models to pull value from it to save you some time. So,
and it's really getting good. Like voice commands have always been around.
Yeah, they since Dragon Naturally Speaking in the 80s, for God's sake.
That's right, where you trained your parrot to turn the lights on and off. But
don't do that. I do not recommend
it. But anyway, yeah. So it's getting really good in just about every interface that I have. I use speech to talk to ChatGPT on my phone. I use speech in my car. We'll talk about that next show.
Sure.
I don't use speech at the PC though, but
yet.
But yeah, I'm getting toward it because just mousing around gets tiring.
I didn't even think about the fact that today when I walk into my office to record a show, I do command Home Assistant via voice to switch to video mode, which switches the computer around, turns on the lights, like configures everything to get ready to record.
That's really cool.
Normal workflow. And then when it's done, tell it, okay, go back to normal, and it switches everything back off again. So yeah, it's happening. So SD, thank you so much for your comment. A copy of Music to Go By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Go By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Go By.
Music to Code By, still a very popular option for developers who want help getting into the zone. And we'll send you a free one if like what just happened right here. Somebody's getting a free Music to Code By. Yep. Okay, let me introduce our guest today. Anita Kvamme is a hands-on software architect with more than 25 years of experience from building business solutions. In the late 90s, she advocated for the importance of UX before it was accepted as important by the software community. Today, Anita feels at home in the domain-driven design community, where she's been a frequent speaker the last years. Currently, she has a great time as a coding software architect at Equinor in a team delivering custom business solutions to the in-house trading desk. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You have you heard the show before?
Oh, yeah. Many, many times.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, great. So this should be a cakewalk for you.
And I originally twigged on the talk you were doing at NDC Oslo about event sourcing, but Equinor is a big company, and if DDDs are playing a role in there, I'd love to hear a bit of the story of what you're doing about how an organization like that approaches software development.
Yeah, actually, when DDD and the book, Eric Evans' book, came out, Equinor engaged in this and invited him over here in Norway to visit us, to tell more about what is DDD and also to engage with some of our teams. And of course, that's a long, long time ago. It was around, I wasn't coding much on that at that time, so I was just partly part of that as a consultant in Equinor. But he came over and it was a lot of, groups and a community building inside Equinor for actually doing domain-driven design. And then awesome. I think we still are a bunch of people doing this and really engaged in the community. But there is also, of course, teams that are not doing domain-driven design. But for me, I call myself a DDD lover. I think I've seen the power for some of the type of application we are doing, where it's highly complicated business application. I think domain-driven design has a big role, and the DDD community is so open and so warm, and I have learned so much from that. But I think that we really from the start had the buy-in from some management, actually getting the Eric Evans over to to our campus and helping us out, I think was a great start, because then you can use your energy in understanding and doing things that it isn't easy. It's always related to building hard solutions too. So you have to focus. And if you use all your focus just to convince the management and other around you that this is something good to do, then you lose the focus of actually doing the good work.
Interesting.
In building the IT solution. So having that support from the start is really, really critical, I think.
Did you say Eric Evans has joined you at Equinor?
No. But we kind of hired him as a consultant for some weeks or something.
That book is more than 20 years old now. Like it's been around a while. And we interviewed him in 2007 and found he's a very kind man, like very, very pleasant to talk to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was so lucky that I was part of the Explore DDD conference in Denver this year. And there we had they had made this cake at the speaker's dinner where Eric Evans was there, and it was for the 20 years since the book came out. So it was a cake with a picture of the front side of the book. And we were kind of kidding that when he take a bit, it was dividing into bonded context. So each got each piece. Cake-driven or domain-driven cake. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Well, I didn't mean to distract too much, but it's a awesome story, and I appreciate your viewpoint on that. It certainly it realized like it's a career length kind of thing too.
Yeah, and for me, it's not a distraction, because event sourcing without domain driven design, I really will not know how to do that.
Oh, interesting.
I think event sourcing gives me the toolbox that is so helpful when doing the other way around, of course. Domain-driven design gives me the toolbox with the concept of aggregates and bonded context and all that. Let's make doing event sourcing much, much easier. And I think that also grew out of that community. So that was how I was introduced to it, actually. So for me, it was no distraction. It was completely inside the context where I think it belongs.
So why is domain-driven design essential to event sourcing?
Well, for me, first of all, it's this, what events are we focusing on? And you can do event sourcing much more technical, but all I have been part of doing, then we focus on domain events. And we say that's a fact. It's something that has happened and really important, something that the business cares about. Right. So actually having that, and also when you do event sourcing, you need those events needs to belong to something. And that something is the concept of aggregates that I know from domain-driven design. And if I haven't kind of understood that concept from before, I think it would be harder to understand. So where are these events belonging to?
Right.
So they need to have a place to live. So that's, I guess, the two main things. And of course, event storming that Alberto Brandolini introduced, also really a member of the DDD community, where it's a brainstorming technique where you identify all these domain events, also fits perfect into this picture and helps me out. And my team, we are using that heavily.
When I think of event sourcing, I think of like let's say you have a financial application and people are in a spreadsheet and they make a change. Rather than changing a value in a table, you add a record to a table that the value was changed from this to that with a timestamp and who did it. But I never really thought of it. When you were describing what you're using it for, it almost sounds more like a logging feature.
Well, in that case, when you change that value, you probably have the business have something in their mind. What are they actually doing? Transferred to in business terms. So it's, for instance, I've been working with some trading strategies, and you can say we have a table with a trading strategy, but when the user start that strategy, we don't look upon that as changing the one value from stop to start, but they have an intention that is starting the strategy, and we get a domain event that says that the strategy is started. So it's more to actually explain in business terms those state changes. and look upon, it's not the importance here just to keep track of the state changes, but really understand what is happening, seen from a behavior perspective in the business. So it is, I feel, I've been working with software design for a long time, as you said in the introduction, and also before, when we did not do event sourcing, we put all this noise in our tables. Of course, we put versions because we need an audit, but then we added flags. We added flags that say, oh, this row is updated by a user. And do you know this user ID that is sysadmin something that we do? And I think everything we did because we wanted to know what has actually happened. We wanted that behavior review, but all we had was this static table and actually should keep the state, but we enhanced it and put a lot of stuff into it in order to be able to detect what has actually happened. And now doing event sourcing, I can just save what did actually happen. And I really find that so useful.
So the domain event is sort of the starting point of an event storm. What is a domain event?
It is something that happened in the past, and that's really different from the command, because the command can fail, and the command could trigger a validation error and so on. But something that has happened, taking the same example, strategy started, is completely different from the command starting the strategy. What if the user is not allowed to do it? So this has already happened, so it's a fact. But it should also be something that the business cares about. And that one I use as a guidance for thinking about which event should we take care of and save, how do we bundle stuff. It should be meaningful or be able to discuss with the user.
Sure.
And if you do this event storming, you try to put those domain events up in a Miro board or a whiteboard or whatever.
As I understand it, it's a whiteboard sticky note process.
Approach. Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
So what's the granularity of a domain event? Is it like adding something to a shopping cart or initiating a sale? Like what's the scope?
Yeah, add item to a shopping cart is a typical example of a domain event. And also remove that item. And of course, then you're into one other typical example of how event sourcing differs from other ways to building solutions. Because if you only have the shopping cart and someone asks you how often do the customer remove just this kind of shoe from my shopping cart, you don't have that information. So one of the slogans for event sourcing is that you will never lose any data because you take care of those so you can answer them. I used to say I'm architecting for tomorrow's question. Mm-hmm. You never know in a data-driven organization. What do they ask tomorrow? They should ask me something new, actually, if we are truly data-driven.
So I imagine that web browsing behavior and how they use the application in a web, for example, which can all be tracked, right? I imagine that is going to be very interested to the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. Interesting.
Yeah, but for us, it's only those events. I mean, how you are navigating into your browser, we are not tracking. We are only tracking the actual. But you could. We could, yeah. And of course, that depends on what information, what is your purpose there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what's important to the organization.
Right.
Yes, it is. And also if you have a more task-based user interface, in opposite to a more CRUD-based, where you actually are thinking about what task are the users doing, and you might have buttons that say start strategy instead of they just changing a column in a table from stop to start, then it's much easier. It's more aligned with doing event sourcing because you're already there knowing the intention behind the user because it's kind of expressing it through the functionality the task is doing in the interface.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Well, and it's something I've always noticed with domain view is that it's far more agnostic. Like CRUD speaks to, I'm speaking to an RDBMS. I mean, I know I can make it with other things, but this idea of the customer wants to add something to the shopping cart. Everything plumbing related to that is secondary to the point, right? It's like, this is what the customer wants to do. There's a ton of ways to go about it. Now we can work through those options. But more importantly, there's a series of events that occur from that desire.
It is. And as long as you have that event, you can at any point in time later on play through those events and construct the information that you need. So you don't need to pick, this is my state of my application in the start. Mm-hmm. And I think that is often very hard to do. To discuss what are a user doing in this application is such much easier to agree upon. But actually, what information are they going to see, and how should we save those? That's a question that need to, when you show the users, you have given them something to say what they actually want to see. Mm-hmm. So having this separated, like a command query responsibility segregation, so you have the events, and then the things that really are changing all the time, what is the valuable information to show to the users? It's much easier to change.
Right.
Would you serialize the state, the relevant state, and put that in an event source record, or would you prefer to calculate the state based on a history or a range of records?
Yeah, I prefer to just make the state based on the history of the. So it's two sides here. On the right side, where you need to have the exact state, and we don't take any eventual consistency there. So what we do, we actually source the state by looping through the events, hence and the term event sourcing. So your events is the truth. And of course, if your stream get too long, there are techniques where you can do snapshotting and so on, but you do that when you have to. But for the start, you just go through, source the events. You read each one event in sequence for that aggregate. And if you don't know the aggregate term for DDD, it's more like it's like a business entity that has both behavior and data. So you get the aggregate state by looping through the event, and you just pick up the things that you need in order to be able to do the business rules on the right side.
Yeah, that's a big difference from somebody who's just doing logging, even with something like Serilog, where you're taking the state of an object or a bunch of objects and putting them in a record. The state is sourced, as you said, from the events, and the clue is right there in the name.
Yeah, and on the read side, when you want to display information, you do have this eventual consistency because you react to those events, and you can pick events from many different streams, and you build up the information you need to see. And there we typically start out, at least, with just having that state in memory, because every time we restart our application, we can just start from the first event, and we can spin it up, and makes it also easy to change early in the process. But when a database grows and becomes too big, then you can build the state and you can save it in whatever database you want to, that is best fit for that purpose. So it's not the event store that keeps the read models. It could be a separate one. And then if you want to change it, you can at any point just scratch it and build it up from scratch. Just if you actually change your read model schema, you don't need to do a database migration. And that's, of course, something that is nice too.
But it makes sense that you can have reconciliation points. So you could say, all right, we're starting at a balance here. Now event stream forward. Yeah. Depending on scope. I can think of plenty of streams that you could last a long time, but there's also plenty where it's like, listen, you're also going to, I use the term reconciliation for a reason. From a financial perspective, there's a point where you declare this month is completed. And here is the truth. And from then on, you don't want any possibility that would change. Not that it should, but there's no reason to go re-reconcile at that point.
Yeah, nice that you take that example, because usually if you try to explain event sourcing to someone from the business, you do the accounting story. Because accounting has been doing event sourcing for hundreds of years.
That's a ledger.
They don't just release something and update they really do it the right way, like you do event sourcing. And if there is for IT people, you say, okay, that's what GitHub is doing. Because they also take you checked in a new pull request, and you don't just update the state, you have the changes that lead to that state.
Yeah, no, you always have a journal. From a DBA's perspective, you only insert, you never update.
Right.
Yeah.
And that way you always have the dialogue of the truth of how things happened in sequence.
Right.
Even though eventually you want an aggregate of that because it gets too expensive to constantly recompute.
Yeah, but there is also a goal, the way you on the write side again, not on the read side where you show the information, but you try to design your aggregates so they are not living forever. So that's the same as accounting is doing again. So for instance, maybe we have aggregates that only have the events for a stream that belongs to a day. For us working with traders, and we do that a lot. So you have techniques for not making those streams so big. So when the application has run for a while, the goal kind of, and this is hard, it's not always we manage to do it, but we try to make those streams so they reset themselves, just as accounting is doing every year.
I've seen a stream system for testing materials. And the data streams are very intensive, but the test runs are minutes long. So there's clearly a beginning, a run, and an end. And then you can look at it from an aggregate perspective. But in that time, they're taking measurements multiple times per second. Like, it can be a ton of data, but at least it has a clear picture. And I think when you think about domain in general for any kind of business case, and again, I'm falling back on e-commerce, I did that the most. The month end is the month end, and we do maintain those aggregates. There's only 12 of them a year because they're historically relevant, but they once made, never changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we want with our events too. We don't want them to be immutable, but of course, since they're a domain event, they also have domain concepts inside them. And that's a choice, but that's a choice we have taken. So that's opinionated. But that means that when we get deeper inside and understand the business concept better, we might want to change them. So you are able to do migration of those events, just as we always are done with our state in the database when we need to do any changes. But then you are not changing the events you have. You read them up and you change them and write them down to a new event store. So you just start with a new copy.
Yeah, this sounds like even just the change of the schema in a database. And there's sort of a break point, going from V1 to V2. And Absolutely. It is not easy to analyze across the break point.
No. So even though we have these read models that we don't need to do migration of, that is really good. The hard part for us then is to keep those events, because there you can have versions or you can migrate them. You have the same challenges as you have when you have that state in a database, and you can't scratch that one. Sure.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think this is a good moment for us to take a brief break for these very important messages.
Attention .NET developers. Looking for the ultimate SDK to handle electronic document processing? Meet TX Text Control. TX Text Control is your go-to solution for seamless PDF generation, secure electronic signatures, and efficient digital forms processing, all within your .NET applications. Empower your products with robust document management capabilities, boost productivity, and deliver top-notch solutions to your clients. Trusted by developers worldwide, including me and Richard, TX Text Control is the SDK that makes a difference. Check out demos.textcontrol.com for live online demos and see it in action.
And we're back. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin. You're listening to .NET Rocks.
Hey.
And we're talking to our friend Anita a bit about event sourcing and the role of domain-driven design in that. Where does Cosmos DB come into this?
Well, we need a place to store our events, but we also need a lot of part of the solution to react to those events. If that is to update your state, or if that is just to do a reaction. For instance, we often get events, we call them the event sourcing events, is inside events. That's part of your application, but you also get events from the outside. For instance, for the traders, a trade could be executed, and we listen to that, and the solution reacts to it. So we need something that is pushing out those changes, and we need something that is have high scale, but also is easy to use. And in Microsoft documentation, on Cosmos DB has something called a change feed, and that is a mechanism for pushing out those changes. And in Microsoft documentation for this change feed, they have event sourcing as one of the scenarios. So we were like, okay,
wow.
we were already committed to work in Azure. So we was already in that area. So then Cosmos DB seems like the best option for us to start. And the power of this change feed is really good, because you can just say, I want to listen to those events, a process that's listening, or you can have multiple processes that listen to those events, and then the Cosmos DB change feed makes sure that events from one stream will only be sent to one of those processes that we also need, because we need the sequence of events are important, but the sequence of events across different aggregates is necessarily important. Mm-hmm. So you get this flexibility, and as a software architect, I really like that, because then I can start small, because we know that we can scale out. We know that Cosmos DB can help us with those things.
Right. That's sort of its claim to fame, right? Is geolocated, synchronized and distributed, but you can start with one node. This is an interesting angle on Cosmos DB I wasn't particularly aware of, that it does have this feed mechanism that serves as streaming of events for sourcing really well.
It does. And that is the reason why we picked just that one.
Well, before you started with DDD, did you do non-DDD development? And how many years of that did you do?
So when did I start with DDD? As I said, it was a period where I was more working with user experience and as a business analyst, but I was part of building solutions that didn't do DDD in the start. Right. So I think when we started out with this, the first one I was part of, I guess that was 2005-06 maybe. And that was a completely different application, non-event sourcing, of course. Yeah. And a different, it was related to partly invoicing and accounting, actually.
Oh, okay. So this is great. So you have experience doing invoicing and accounting without the benefits of event sourcing and DDD, and then afterwards. So what was that process like? Like, when did the light bulb come on, and did you at first think, oh, well, this seems like a lot of ceremony to get started, but then it got easier? Like, what was your experience like making that transition?
Yeah, first, if you take the transition from kind of non-domain driven design solution to domain driven design solution, that was a rewrite we did of huge monolithic application. It's actually there still running with the first line of code written in 1994, so it's a really old one, having a great value for the business still. But to take down some technical risk, we needed to migrate quite a huge part of that application. And I think for me, I read the domain-driven book, domain-driven design book when it came out, and having this UX hat on, I think it's kind of the same, because that's what you want to do as a user experience person too. You want to understand the business, and you want to try to use those concepts, and that's what we try to do. So I say that DDD is UX for the developers. It's you try to do the business concept inside your solution. And for me, the big change was that you could write this automatically test around the bounded context. All of a sudden, we could put them into pieces that was possible to handle, and possible we use behavior-driven development to write those tests, like spec flow test or feature test. I guess you have a lot of different names of those tests, but it's more high level than unit test. So for me, that was, I had a great person in my team, Ellen Lippe, and she knew DDD out and in and was a good teacher. So for me, it wasn't a lot of overhead. It just makes sense to think that way and to build the solutions that way.
Right. So rather than building them by business feature, you built them by technical things that they did, like I would imagine.
No, more opposite. Instead of making the model of your software based on technical concept, because you can always solve one problem.
Right, like an emailer, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you have a calculation and you make those technical lists, for instance, instead of really understanding what is the business concept seen from the business that is part of this calculation.
Yeah.
And my belief and what I think is the power of domain-driven design is that when you use the business concept, it is more likely that the next business requirements actually fit into your code base.
Sure.
Because it's coming from the same business. So I can't prove it, I usually say, but I have experienced it. So that's
right.
Yeah.
So I'm working on an application right now, and while it's not formal DDD, we certainly grouped the projects into their different domains, but then we ended up with a shared project that has code that they're all going to use, but in different ways. So then we would subclass in the domain, the appropriate domain, what we needed, and strip out the generic fundamental stuff in the shared project. I guess that's something that you probably, I mean, somebody could be out there saying, yeah, but wouldn't you duplicate a lot of code? Well, no, not necessarily. Not if you just have good architecture design up front.
Yeah, and I think if it's two different bounded context, so it's two different business area, they will probably change for different reason and at a different pace. So even though if it is a duplication from the start, I'm much more concerned that, okay, what if it is the same, but then it starts to change independent of each other because it doesn't really belong together seen from the business.
Sure.
So I find this thinking in the business term as a really good guideline for getting the right part of your application together. And that makes it easier to maintain it.
Okay. So Anita, how do you go about actually building an event source driven application?
Well, actually, I get a lot of help from some building blocks. 4 building blocks is all you need. And this was coined by Sebastian von Conrad. I just picked up on a talk he had. I looked up at YouTube. So I wasn't even at the conference. But I think it helps me demystify event sourcing, because what you need is, first you need a building block that is writing with commands, and that takes care of whatever the user is doing. So when the user is doing something in the application, that intention is captured in a command. And then that command need to do something to something. And this something here is the aggregate from DDD, as I say, a business entity with behavior and state. And the result of that is some new events, or it could be 0 events. So that is the one building block. And this is the one that is most similar from what we did before. But then, of course, since we have an event source and just save those events, we need also to get the state in place. And here we have the concept or the building blocks of read models. And when you have this read model, you just listen to those events that we briefly mentioned, and you pick out the pieces of information you need, and you build up the information that you want to display for the users. So this backend for front-end pattern is really easy and a good way to go about for that. And then you have what Sebastian von Conrad says is the cool stuff, and I really tend to agree with him, but that's the reactors. So what do the reactors? Well, they react to events. And I think living in a world where there is more and more automation, that's what our solution is doing more and more. It's not necessarily the users pushing the buttons anymore. But you get events from you're part of an event-driven ecosystem, kind of.
Right.
And you need to react to those events. For us, that is working related to the traders, the trade executed or the strategy started. Everything needs to react to each other. And these reactors is also the only one where we isolate any side effects, calling of APIs, and all those, or sending out outside events, so other solutions should react to. That is part of the reactors.
Sure. And the users are one source of the events. But I mean, you've said a couple of times trading, and Equinor's you're in the petroleum business. So you're dealing with production, you're dealing with refinement, and we're dealing with commodities markets. So you have a lot of disparate sources of events.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of areas out there where there are a lot of events. And when we do automation, we need to identify those events because we need to know when should other solution do something when something has happened in the one solution. And so for us, it's a lot of different events and the application I'm working with now is more like the traders for the gas traders. And they have products, and there is a lot of events when you are on an exchange, even if it was
the
money
past couple
trading.
of years, natural gas has been, let's say, important.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. That's true. And so that is the third building block. And the fourth one is just this event store. And I think some of the secret of actually not making our applications too complex, because you could say, okay, before I only had one building block, it was so much easier. I don't need the reactor, the command, and the remodels. But then again, they tend to be very complex. Now we can divide where we put different business rules. For instance, if you have heavy calculation, if you have calculation like you should use that number of digits after in the calculation, or if you use this factor to go from energy to volume and all those things, you can do that just in the read models because it's not part of the source events. So you can place the business rules in the different part of the different building blocks. And I think the clue of it all is to make application, because event sourcing is a bit complex.
Right.
So it's a complex arrangement and there is no way around it, but you have to make sure it's a complex arrangement of small parts. So each part is not growing. And I think we, at least us that have worked in the IT area for years and years, we have been so used to build those big solutions.
Right.
So we tend to put everything together. And I think that's what we as an industry are trying to solve now. We want it more distributed. We want to split things up so we can change them and so on. So here too, we have to keep eye on the different building blocks.
Sure.
And
I think
create them small.
Not every app makes sense for event sourcing, but you have a complex multi-event problem.
Yeah.
And other techniques could be applied, but they may have more residency problems. Like you might have more problems maintaining that. There's something about the architecture of event sourcing that tolerates adding new event feeds really well, adding new reactions to those event feeds well.
Yeah, that's a clue,
it's
I
very
think.
tolerant to content diversity, that more and more things can come at it. And it doesn't get in the n over n minus one problem. It doesn't compound the problem when you add more diversity that way.
Yeah, and I think that's the bet here, that can we get to a place where adding new stuff isn't becoming harder and harder?
Right.
Because it's the smaller and
that is
small
the holy
pieces.
grail of software development, isn't it?
And of course, but we can't stop believe that we will get there someday. So we have to try, but at least I think it's easier for event sourcing to add smaller parts.
Well, and arguably, if you've really done this well, it gets easier because the services are already there for a lot of these things. So as a new event class comes in or as a new reactor is needed, you don't have to build a bunch of stuff because the infrastructure is already there.
Yes.
I almost think it's a dream, but all we're hoping for is it doesn't get worse. It'd be nice if it actually got better.
Yeah, and of course, event sourcing isn't the solution for everything.
No,
and
not at all.
Everybody has said that event sourcing is not a high-level architecture pattern. It's not something that you choose. Okay, everything that I make should be event sourced, or everything we make in our company. It doesn't, because you have some simple problems that is really just a CRUD problem. It's just updating some information. And the same discussion we have had for domain-driven design for years too. How complex should it be for actually it really the extra effort you put into doing DDD is something you should do. So, but as I said, I've been working mainly with complex business application, and there it makes sense for some of the problem we solve. And the one I'm working on now, I sometimes just thinking, how should I solve this if I haven't had event sourcing? And that feels like, okay, maybe we have gotten a good pattern just for this, our problem space. But it, of course, each problem space is different, and that's always the starting point, understanding what you are solving.
Yeah. Well, and that makes me wonder, like, can you decide this ahead of time? Do you know enough, or do you have to make the wrong thing first? Like, do you have to start down a path, building something, addressing some aspect of this, and then realize, oh, this is going to be a problem. We need to re-architect into an event source model.
I would think the answer is read the book first.
Only if you know you have the problem.
Well, you might not know. Maybe I would think that the first thing is look up what event sourcing is, and then consider how you're going to be accessing data and make the decision, because it can't. You're right. It can't apply everywhere. Yeah,
and that's why when I have the talk I had at NDC, I try to focus on what is the good part and what is the hard part, because you can't tell people when you should use it based on business domains or so on. But I try to line out, this is really nice with event sourcing, and this is make it harder when you do event sourcing. And then I think each team need to think about the problem they are solving and see, do they think that the benefits are better than the pain? But of course, you might, for instance, the first product where I used it, we had this event sourcing is really known for being a time machine. We can't travel into the future, but we can travel back. And our user told us they had some outages on the fabric that they needed to keep track of. And I said, we would like in the future to know which of these outages did we know about 3 months before they happened.
Right.
And event sourcing is kind of the really, really good fit for that. So it was one of our motivation for picking that pattern. And then it turns out we didn't get to that part when they needed that information. So, yeah, sometimes you have to, it might be changed. But I think focusing on the good and the hard part, to understanding how are it different. And then each team needs to think about, okay, here we see that we can solve a lot of things that event sourcing has their good spot. And then it might be a good time of using it. And one of the main pain points is actually the mindset. It's different from what people are used to. But I guess in IT industry, we are used to needing to change our mindset and learn new stuff all the time.
If we're good,
you have to have a team that embrace that part, to think differently.
Sure.
You reminded me of when you said, how would we know 3 months ahead of time? Well, we look at the event sources. Is there room for predictive analytics and other AI to look at the event source data and maybe notify us when they see patterns coming?
We haven't been playing in that area, but yeah, I think so. I think, as I said, I use this slogan of architecting for tomorrow questions.
Sure,
and that is because you have those events and you can do analytics on them. And you don't need to know ahead of time actually what information do we need, because we are only thinking what are happening in the business and the critical information related to that event, a bit independent of if it's useful or not. Because one day it will be. You also have to
put in the event source catastrophic failure if you're going to try to prevent it in the future.
This is going to be more data intensive, but goodness knows we have enough storage space like that.
Right.
Once upon a time, we were really careful about how much data we stored, and so we tended to steer the aggregate because it costs less. That's not the issue anymore. Now the issue is we don't know why we did what we did last year. Because we only have the aggregate data, not the whole chain.
Yeah. I actually had a very interesting discussion with Alberto Brandolini at the Explore DDD conference, where he was talking that sometimes, if I understood it correctly, they sometimes see that issues you try to solve, for instance, in the data warehouse could have been kind of easily extracted if you have the events. Because I think when you get to, on the other side, you try to do the analytics. As I said, even in our solution back in time, we put all this flag, because I think we need to know what have happened and why. Yeah. And before we only had this data, so we do different things just to try to analyze it, to understand what did happen in the business. And this gives you that as the core part of your information. So I really believe that as organization get more and more data-driven and more part are looking at the data, that it's easier to compare because you have put it in a context already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the sort of modern data analytics model now, where you have the quote-unquote data lake rather than a warehouse, you're literally just dropping those blocks of events up into the lake for analytical tools to be able to have access to the truth rather than the aggregate.
Yeah. I know we also try to, at least in Equinor, to embrace this data mesh concepts. Mm-hmm. So instead of having one big lake that every events are swimming in, you have it into a mesh that is, I call it domain-driven design for data, because you try to make a domain around your collective data that you before put just in a warehouse, because that will also give you more context. And I think that's the hard part with data. Without context, what is it actually? That is hard to say.
The challenge with the mesh is the intersection points, right? If each different set of applications has its own customer, how do we have a unified customer?
Yeah.
But those are good problems to tackle.
Mm-hmm. It is. And I guess that's the challenge of the distributed application too. Mm-hmm. When we split things, it's hard to put it together. When everything is together, it's really, really hard just to move it anyway.
To evolve it to everything.
Always this balance. Yeah.
The monolith isn't the answer to everything, and the distributed system isn't the answer to everything. So there's always going to be seams.
Yeah.
Where we're going to have to figure out how to battle with those particular issues.
Common topic we've been discussing here for the last year or so, or 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years, good Lord.
At least. Probably longer. Just because of sort of the reality of we're now at a place where we have as much compute, as much storage as we want. So now you're sort of designing for the optimal. Maybe it's a cost control thing, but it's most of the cost controls are about maintaining software, being able to do the new versions quickly, being able to respond to business opportunities. And so you architectures are hard. There isn't a right way. If there was, we'd all be doing it.
That's right. You could buy it at 7-Eleven if it was easy.
I heard someone saying that, look at all the conferences out there on IT.
Yeah.
If it was easy, why should we have them? It's because we need to learn from each other to solve those problems, because everything depends. So you need to learn enough to really be able to think about how should we do it in our context.
Mm-hmm. So what's next for you, Anita? Speaking anywhere, writing some more stuff. What are you working on? What's in your inbox?
Yeah, well, we'll go to London to the JAX London conference.
Nice.
That's the next one. That's the only one I know for now. But I also are thinking about talks for both Explore DDD and DDD Europe, just because I think those conferences I learn so much every time I go there. And I really want to both learn from others and share what I have learned by working as hands-on every day. So, but main part, it's to make this application that we are working on for the traders better and better and more functionality every day together in the team. I really enjoy working in a team.
Fantastic. Before we go, I really appreciate the plain English way that you explain these things. It's great.
Oh, thank you.
And I really appreciate your approach to event sourcing and DDD and on all of it. It's great. So thank you very much for joining us this hour.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Have a nice evening.
All right. And we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC.